Blessed love, my Lord and Empress, give thanks for life and the mighty life giver, Jah Rastafari. Yes, this is the African Liberation Network, and I am the host, the Honorable Prophet Daniel. And we have a special guest with us, a brother from South Africa, who is someone who I've worked with, and he's been on the African Liberation Network twice already. This is his third time here. He's the most frequent interviewee of all, and we're very pleased to have him with us. He's a very knowledgeable brother and a very genuine and pure African, and we give thanks for his stance that he's taken, in fighting for the voice of the original African indigenous culture, and not giving in, to the outside, the foreign influence. The brother's name is the Honorable General ThauThau Haramanuba. Welcome again, my brother. Give thanks.
Give thanks in the name of His Majesty Haile Selassie I. Give thanks, Honorable Prophet Daniel, even for having me this time in this African Liberation Network platform. We give thanks, my Lord, and even to the viewers and everyone else. We give thanks and we greet you in the name of His Majesty Rastafari.
Rastafari, give thanks. Yes, so the Honorable General ThauThau has recently embarked on another branch of his journey as a teacher. The last time we had him, and even the first time we had him, he had mentioned the Bake Hase society that he, was a Grand Master of, and recently has, started another chapter of his journey, which is called the Bantu Soul Society. Am I right, Honorable?
Yes,
Yes, I. So we want to, get some insight, into, what led the eye to create this new, teaching opportunity, and just kind of, we'll get into what the Bantu Society is, but we want to kind of get to start with your journey, what brought you to this point and why you found it to be necessary. So I would just ask if you could kind of tell myself and the viewers about your journey in South Africa as a Rastafari, some of the struggles you've had, some of the lessons that you've learned that brought you to the place that you are now as a Grandmaster teacher of, Indigenous African culture, and, just kind of give us a little rundown of, what brought you to create such a school, if you will, or a society.
Give thanks. Give thanks again, my Lord.
Honorable.
Honorable. Bantu is who we are. Rasta is what we are. So we've been talking a lot about Bantu, the Bantu people, as part of complementing the Rastafari teachings. As we know that the Rastafari movement, as we know it, although it can trace its roots back to Africa, but it largely originated from the African living spora, what they call the African diaspora. So, and of course, the conditions which it was created in, there was little knowledge about Africa, about the Bantu, which in the continent we make a large percentage of adherents of the Rastafari living. So we've been talking, actually we first established the Bantu Order of Rastafari, which is Bake Hase. But we also find that it's a limited space, and sometimes what with so much debate as Bantu versus Bible and all of that. So we thought, let's widen the space and focus. Basically, we're doing what Rasta is supposed to be doing, which is focusing on African roots and culture, giving the African culture voice, the African knowledge system a voice and a platform. And we also find that it is not only the Rastafari who are in need of this knowledge and this consciousness, but it is the entire Black world. It is the entire Black world, both at home and abroad. And therefore, we created a platform that accommodate even the non-Rastafari African people at home and abroad to connect with their African roots. So we established Bantu Soul Society. Bantu Soul Society is an institute of Africanity. So Africanity, it is made up of, this institute is providing 9 modules. And these 9 modules are African spirituality, African cosmology, African ontology, African philosophy, African psychology, African culture, African history, and African calendar system. That we find that most people, even when they get into these spaces of consciousness, they are only dealing with Kemet. And when you look at it, really Kemet, it is in the northern hemisphere. We are in the southern hemisphere. Kemet is on the other side of the equator. So which is certain aspect of it is pretty much synchronized with the northern hemisphere in terms of even calendar system. So it doesn't speak much to this larger sub-Saharan African population to connect with. So let us assess our African knowledge system, because the Bantu, we are largely coming from an oral tradition society where not much was written, but a lot was preserved through oral tradition, which will then include songs, poetry, storytelling, and so many spoken word traditions. And very few script, and those script that are there, they're just relegated to the museums, like the Bantu script, the Lebombo script, and so forth. And then the focus is to deal with Africa beyond Ethiopia and Egypt. And the focus also, it's very intentional to move our people's consciousness from Christianity to Africanity. That before most of our people were converted into Christians, they were Africans, and they had their own cosmology, had their own spirituality, they had their own ontology, they had their own epistemology, their own concept, their own theory of knowledge, they had their own philosophy, and they had their own calendar system. As we chose also 23rd September to launch in this side of the hemisphere is the African New Year, what they call spring equinox. Is our African New Year. In Zulu, they call it the month of Emandu, which means the month of the beginning, or the month of the ancient time. Emandu translate ancient time, old time. In Kemet, they will refer to it as Zep Tepi. So, and hence we chose that we go into launch in the beginning of the year, but it's been in conceptualization over the period of years. And then, but the main focus to create an institution that is both, there is an aspect of it which is academical, so to say, what intellectualizing our African knowledge system, institutionalizing it, and the other aspect, it is more spiritual, dealing with now what they call the African traditional religion, or the Europeans, when they come here, they classify as the African primal religion or African tribal religion, or African indigenous religion. Although we know we don't even have an African word for religion, we don't have religion, we have spiritual cultures. That no single tribe in Africa is without a name for God. They had a God concept. The Africans have their own God concept. The Africans have their own philosophy and so forth. So as a result, so we find ourselves that we need to establish this knowledge system, institutionalize it, and make it available to our people. So we have online classes. We have for long distance correspondence, those who want to learn as far as in the US, in the Caribbean, Southern America, in the UK. So we have online classes for those long distance correspondences and studies. We conduct seminars, we conduct workshops. So we engage in different ways of knowledge and information dissemination of this great Bantu people.
Yes, I give thanks. Yes, I. So give thanks for explaining, what the Bantu Soul Society is about. I would love it if you could kind of share with us, like, some of your journey as far as being a Rastafari, some of the, because, we're friends on Facebook, and I see a lot of the conversations that you have, and I see how people respond to your take on Rastafari. A lot of times you're met with, kind of a hateful kind of and intolerant response. What is your, could you just kind of tell us, like, what are some of the things that people, that Rastafari people kind of try to burn you out about, like, what is it about you and your teaching and your way, your, like, say, Bake Hase and this Bantu tradition, and like, well, what are people holding on to that you would say is kind of contrary to Africanity, as you said?
Well, as you might appreciate or notice that most of us here in Africa, when we become Rasta or we cite up Rastafari, most of our people, they turn Jamaican. They try to imitate the Jamaicans, how they speak, how they do things, to the point of seeing that for them to be a proper Rasta, they need to sanitize themselves from their Africanness. They need to disassociate themselves with their African roots and culture and adopt the culture as created by the Jamaican, what is to be accepted and what is should not be accepted. And one of those being the use of the Bible as a final judge of all reality, the use of the Bible as a final judge of the African knowledge system or African cultures of what, and which is not like that, because we have cultures that are way older than the Bible, way profound, more holier, if you may, and very glorious, which is the reason why the colonialists, one of their focus was to suppress the African culture and to replace it with the Christian culture that you find most of us, we have to be given European names, which they call them Christian names. We have to then adopt Christian value system, calendar system, the way we operate in by the Gregorian calendar and so forth. So Rastafari as a movement does not provide all of these things. Like, doesn't focus on African spirituality, but talks more about Judeo-Christianity. It's like pretty much the history of Ethiopia. The history of Ethiopia for the past 3,000 years is Judeo-Christian. It's not really African in a sense, although that majority will try to Africanize the Bible and try to claim that this is African It was stolen from Africa without really providing us where in Africa, which tribe in Africa wrote the Bible, where in Africa do you have a story of a God who created the earth in 6 days and rest on the seventh day? Where in Africa do you find most of us, our weeks, as the Bantu, our weeks is a week of 6 days, which begins on Monday and ends on Saturday. We don't even have an African word for Sunday, because Sunday came up with the colonialists and the Christians, when the missionaries, when they converted our people. So then ours is to stick to one of the original intent and principles of Rastafari, which is returning ourselves to our roots and culture. Must remember that for our people to be in the Western Hemisphere was against their will. They did not volunteer. They were stolen from Africa. They were uprooted. They were transplanted. They were detribalized. They were deculturalized. And so they have to now try to hold on to those few remnants things that they could still have through memory, through oral tradition. But the larger part of what makes them African, which is their African spirituality, the African cosmology, how the African perceive the cosmos and how the Africans organize the cosmos, their African ontology, how the African define their beingness as the Bantu, Ubuntu, Isintu, their African calendar system. All of these things were wiped out of our people's memory. And then comes Rastafari with all these biblical ideas to replace this indigenous African thing, but that does not speak to who we truly are. So when you try to articulate this within the Rastafari movement among the people who are well brainwashed into that biblical system, it causes conflict. And it creates a situation where we have these endless debates. And mostly you are debating with even people who know these things, but they're trying their level best to forget them. So it's different from the Africans who were pretend to forget these things, like who forgot them completely, and the Africans who did not forget, but who choose to forget deliberately in order to fit into the Rastafari narrative. So, and into an African culture that is recreated in the Western Hemisphere instead of the African culture that they grew up in. Most of these things that we teach about the Bantu within the Bantu Soul Society is stuff that we grew up with. It's stuff that we heard our grandmothers talking about. We grew up in a society that hold on to these things. Like I'm telling you that our African New Year is beginning in a month which they call it Emandulu, or the month of the beginning of the ancient time. So we still have this thing in the language. We still have this thing in our own African calendar system, which also they have just took those words, the names, like what they did with pretty much everything. They take African names and make them fit into Western system. They take the African calendar names and make them fit into the Gregorian calendar system. They take the African names of gods or the African names of the divine or of divinities and put them into the Bible. If you find the Bible translated in Zulu, it is using the African Zulu name of God to define the biblical God, who is not the same. It's completely different. So it's like God is a German word, come from the German word of the Northern Scandinavian mythology. Now you have this one particular name called God with about 3,000 African names. When you reach Zimbabwe, it's Muari. When you reach among the Zulus, is Nkulunkulu. When you reach among the Baganda in Uganda, is Katonda. When you reach among the Ashanti people, is Nyame. So it can be correct. So therefore, the aim is to really center our people that even as we embrace the consciousness of Rastafari, but we must not lose our roots and culture.
Rastafari, give thanks. It's interesting, because, all right, Rastafari emerged because of the fact that our Africanness had been beaten out of us, had been, forced out of us. So it was an attempt to reconnect with the continent and with our original roots and culture. But being that the Bible was really the only tool or the only book or whatever that maybe they had in those days. And that's what they had been, fed during life in the plantation, which they didn't come to the West with the Bible. They only got it while they were on the plantation. But in an attempt to reconnect, the elders, the first Rastafari people, used the Bible to identify His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, because even as we had spoken before in our first interview, Ethiopianism had already begun to exist all into like the 1800s, the early 1800s, leading up to the beginning of the Rastafari movement. But now the fact that we are reluctant to accept African culture, and even to the point where ones are even kind of hateful and distasteful of original African culture, is really ironic, because as I said, Rastafari was an attempt to reconnect with African spirituality. So I feel, based on what you just said, it's like we have to be willing to evolve. We can't feel like we know it all already, because most of us haven't even been to the continent to really know what the culture is existing there. So I find it to be very a great thing that the AI is doing, and I don't fight against it. Even though as a Bobo Ashanti, we definitely use the Bible for like Psalms reading and ceremonially, and even as a spiritual guide. There are definitely things that ones and ones can learn from the Bible, but I personally don't say it begins and ends with the Bible, and that we should certainly learn more about indigenous culture. As you said, African culture is not limited to Ethiopia and Egypt, and Rastafari is not limited as well to those regions, especially Ethiopia. I mean, yeah, it's His Majesty was a Christian, yes, but he was a ruler of all. I mean, many tribes, many different types of people with different types of culture. And I feel I can't quote him verbatim, but I know that he said something in the nature of, he represents all of those people. Even though he is a Christian himself, he represents them and he defends their faith. He's the defender of all faith, of all human faith. That's what our creed says. So I give thanks, that the eye is bold enough, not afraid to, speak what because I know what you're talking about. So yeah, give thanks, my Lord. So I would ask now, how does Rastafari, the culture and the liberty, the movement, align with, say, indigenous African cultures, being that there's so many of them? As you said, there's so many different names for God and so many different versions of culture and languages. How can Rastafari align with those cultures and none of them lose their identity?
Well, I guess this is the struggle that Rastafari is being having over the past 93 years of its existence as a movement. And this struggle is based on, number one, you made a very important point that His Majesty said, yes, I am a Christian, but as a king, I'm equally a Christian, a Muslim, and a Piaga. So, and showing that he's not only the king of Ethiopia, but he's the king of every black man all over the world. And which is an attitude that the Rastafari lacks. The attitude that, yes, I'm a Rasta, but I embrace my Africanness and my fellow Africans. So here in the continent, most ones, when they become Rasta, they become anti-African culture, which therefore position Rastafari as just one of those things that originated in the Western world and come to be in contrast and conflict with the African culture. But we are in living evidence that there is no contradiction. I'm a Rasta, I embrace African culture, I embrace African diversity, I embrace African heritage, African history. I don't have to biblicize it. I don't have to whitewash it. I embrace it in its totality, and even in its strangeness, because it's an irony that you find that once are saying they're Rasta and they embrace the Ethiopian culture, and but they're rejecting same thing that I found in Ethiopian culture that you find in African culture. They'll be telling that, yeah, African culture is a blood culture. They are eating meat, but Ethiopians are worse than most Africans. Ethiopians are actually the only African I know who eat raw meat, while most Africans, they have to cook their meat. So you go to their restaurants, they have restaurants all over South Africa, yeah, Johannesburg, everywhere, GP Street, you'll find this portion of raw meat eating community, which is quite very strange. So, it is then speaks to our conditioning as Rasta that we find that most of our brethren, they're in a struggle against themselves and even against Babylon, the system. Most of them, when what they define to be demonic, heathen, and pagan is their African culture. And they're not talking about non-African culture most of the time. They're talking about their immediate culture, that to the point that they disown their own names, refer to that as tribal and tribalism, but they still profess to be part of a biblical tribe like the 12 tribes of Israel. So you're rejecting your Zulu tribe, you go and pick up another tribe, you call yourself the tribe of Reuben, Simeon. And then you still, whenever you making reference to your own culture, says tribal. But when you making reference to biblical tribe, you don't see anything tribal about it. Is what I was saying to people, that you see, we are colonized, not only the spaces that we live in and the land and what, but our minds, the ideas, the principles, the concepts that we're using. We're colonized to believe that when you say tribe, you're talking about something exclusively, uniquely, innately African, while the word tribe is not even African. It's not a name. It's not a name of African origin. It comes from Europe. And then, but we are colonized to believe that when you say tribe, you're talking about Africans. And now, when you ask the people, what is going on between Ukraine and Russia? Is it not a tribal war? Are these not two tribes of the Slavs? What happened during the First World War and Second World War? What you call World War, it was not a World War, it was a tribal war in Europe. Different tribes of the Europeans, the Germanicas, the Franks, which we call the French, the Germans, the Anglo-Saxons, they were on each other's throat. And the problem with European tribalism is that it always involves other non-Europeans. And African tribalism is just among Africans, the Hutus and the Tutsis, the Zulus and the Xhosas, all these tribes that is taking place. And at best, most of our tribal wars in recent years, they have been fueled by the West. But the West, when it engaged in its own tribal wars, it drafted us into it. My grandfather fought in the Second World War as a South African British soldier. We went all the way to fight in Ethiopia, but the war was not even among Africans, it was among the Europeans to map out the world and dominate the world. So we are colonized to believe that even today, most of our people, when they make weddings, they have to make two weddings. There is a wedding, they call it a traditional wedding, where they'll be dressed up like myself. And then they have the other wedding now, the white wedding. Now they refer to their wedding as a traditional wedding, and they forget that the white wedding is a traditional wedding of the Europeans. So they are colonized to believe that Africans have traditions and Europeans have civilizations. Africans have culture, Europeans have civilizations. Africans have tribes, Europeans have nations. What you refer to as European nationalities are European tribes. And what you're referring to as African tribes are not even tribes, are nations. Because we live in the kingdom of so many nation states that we don't even have an African word for tribe again. Like most of these things that Africans are called with, that because we know God in 3,000 names, we will be called polytheist. But we don't even have that name in our own language. That what is polytheism? What is polytheist? What is heathen? So we're always named by the other, defined by the other, and somehow in the most prejudiced and the most biased way. So now, therefore, Bantu Soul Society is to bring our people back to their sanity, the African sanity, through their own knowledge, to empower our people with their own knowledge that, listen, don't allow other people to fool you, to throw away your own knowledge and replace it with their own knowledge. It's colonization. So the focus, therefore, it is decolonization of the African mind and decolonization of the African spirit. So the battle has always been the battle for the soul of the Bantu. Yet the Bantu, as the Bantu say, the oldest human soul. We know that the oldest human soul is the Bantu soul, because the Bantu are the oldest people. Even before there was the Europeans, there was the Bantu people.
Rastafari, I give thanks. For those that don't know, because maybe a lot of people probably have no idea what you mean when you say Bantu. Trace us all the way back and bring us forward to now as far as Bantu people and who are they, where are they? You know, just give us some information, some insight into Bantu, please.
The Bantu make up 75% of Africa's population.
Okay.
The Bantu are the ancestors of the Egyptians, the Kemites. The Bantu are the largest population even in Ethiopia. The Oromos are part of the Bantu.
Okay.
The Bantu people are these people who are largely agricultural communities who hold on, most of them, what they share in common throughout the continent. They hold on to the idea of Mudimu, what they call in English God, and Badimu, what they call ancestors, and Ubuntu, which is our philosophy of life, Ubuntu. Mm-hmm. Now, it cut across. So the Bantu is these people who hold on to Ubuntu, what they call in Kemeto art. So the Bantu, you also identify them. They use 3 stones when they make fire. Throughout the continent, you see these people who use 3 stones. Everyone in South Africa is the Bantu, except a smaller portion referred to as the Khoi and the San, or the Khoi San. And then everyone in Zambia is Bantu, everyone in Zimbabwe is Bantu, everyone in Swaziland is Bantu, everyone in Lesotho is Bantu, everyone in Namibia is Bantu, everyone in Angola is Bantu, everyone in
Kenya, Rwanda,
Burundi, these are the Bantu people. So most of them, throughout West Africa, some of the Western historians, they try to claim that the Bantu originated in the Cameroon. So they're just grabbing on straws. Some they say they they have like 3 different theories of our origin. But we originated in this continent, in so many places. We have so many places of origin that we point out to. So actually the Bantu people are the indigenous black men of Africa, are the original black men of Africa. This majority of these black people who are in the Western Hemisphere, I would actually say categorical that all the black people in the Western Hemisphere are the Bantu, who just have lost their Bantu language, their Bantu culture through the great Ma'afa, through the Mahamisi, the great genocide and Holocaust of the transatlantic slave trade, but they are all Bantu. So Bantu is the original black man of Africa. So when we refer to ourselves as Batu or Bantu or Banu. Is our own name that we have named ourselves. The rest is people who come and say you are Africans, the Romans. The Greeks came and say you are Ethiopians. The Muslim came, the Arabs came and say you are Sudanese. You are Azanj, where they got the name Azani and so forth. But the name, our own self-definition, when we define ourselves and refer to ourselves, we call ourselves Abantu, Bantu people. So they try also to divide them and said, no, they are the Bantus, and then there are the Nilotic, and there are the Kushites. But the majority of the Cushitic people or people found in the land of Kush, which is Ethiopia, are the Bantu, the Sidamas, the Oromos. These are the Bantu people. You have the Bantu people of Somalia, who are very much persecuted by this other non-Bantu, which is basically like the Afro-Asiatics, who are found in the Horn of Africa. And you come all down is Bantu. Now the Nilotic again is simply meaning the people of the Nile, but you get the Baganda in the Nile is Bantu. You get the Banyoro along the Nile is Bantu. So actually, all of these people who prefix themselves with the prefix Ba, you know, Baganda, Bakongo, Banyarwanda, Baluba, Bachopi, Bachwezi, Bahima, Batembuzi, Basotho, Bavenda, Bapedi, Botswana is all the Bantu people. So Bantu people is the black people of Africa, the original black men of Africa. Hence we say the oldest human soul is the Bantu soul, because even within this framework of anthropology, where some people are questioning that, but when you go into the studies of origin and genetic or monogenetics, they tell you that the first people on earth are the black people, and everyone else is a mutation of the black people. Everybody else come from the black woman. But that first woman who lived 300,000 years ago, who went on to become the mother of all civilization and the mother of all creation, is a Bantu, is Ntu, is a mother of the Bantu. So Ntu, Ba is a soul or a spirit.
Mm.
In Kemet, Ba is represented as a bird with a human head. It's Ba. Because they're using picture writing, hieroglyphics, they will portray this as a bird. Bird is a symbol of spirit or fly, that which can flip its wings and make a wind and carry itself to the highest level with a human head. So Ba is a soul or essence or spirit. And Ntu is the first goddess of all the black race, who's portrayed in Kemet. The Greeks, they jumbled the name around to the NTU, they turn it into NUT, Nut, the goddess Nut, or the sky goddess. So, and then among the Zulu, they will talk about Nom Kubulwane, or the Nkosazane Yezulu, or the princess of heaven. So Ntu is the primogenitor of all black people, is the genetrix, the mother of all black people of Africa. So when we say Bantu, we are just saying the people of the goddess Ntu, or the children of the goddess Ntu.
Rastafari, give thanks. At this time, I would like to take a moment to give you a opportunity to, introduce the viewers to your, the eye is a brand ambassador for a clothing line called Somandla, if I said that right. I would just love it if you could kind of, give us, a little information as far as what it represents, what is it, how can one's order it, is it available everywhere, whatever you have to share, just, like a commercial for the eye.
All right, no, give thanks. Somandla is a clothing, is a clothing brand of the Magadlela group. These are the brethren who are in KwaZulu-Natal, in the land of the Zulus. They are based in Durban. And then they are making these T-shirts with the Ankh in front and those Kemetic symbols on them. They have the golf T-shirts, which are about 580 Rand. The V-neck and the round neck, about 480 Rand. They're also making the Ankh. I think you might have seen one of my picture. That is the Was, which is the small one is 500. The big one is 750, and then they have the Ankh. There is the bigger Ankh, the tall one. I saw in your promo poster. I'm holding it. It's about 750, and the smaller Ankh is about 500 rand. So I'm the brand ambassador. They are also one of the sponsors, or they were one of the sponsors who were involved in our launching yesterday of Bantu Soul Society. So we're working together to promote the African culture. So when they look around among the Rastafari and one of the teachers of this African heritage, and then they found me to be one of the people who are leading in that particular space, and they find that it will be necessary to request me to be their brand ambassador, which I look at the concepts and the idea, I find that it is complementary to what I'm advocating and what we are advocating as Bantu Soul Society. So we agreed then to be their brand ambassador and yes, to promote what they're doing. So they're doing the t-shirts, the anks, the was, the jackets. Also, they have some jackets with the same chematic symbols. So yeah, some people can order through me, or they can order through directly from them. There are some contacts of them with the same number that is appearing in these posters. You can link them up through WhatsApp, or you can order through me. And then, of course, when you order through me, that will contribute to the profit that we're supposed to get as an brand ambassador. And therefore, it contributes to the Bantu Soul Society. So for now, they are a clothing company that is working with Bantu Soul Society to promote the African heritage.
Well, that's awesome. That's beautiful. Give thanks. I love the look of the style of the clothes. It speaks volumes. And I love the cooperation. Being that your initiative and their brand, lines up good. That's great. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to be able to give you an audience to, hopefully generate some sales, and support the work.
Yes.
Yes, so yeah, ones and ones that's watching, do reach out, do support. It can be shipped anywhere, correct?
Yeah, they can be shipped anywhere. And you must remember that, when we do the works that we do, you hardly get any funding from the establishment, because you are perceived to be a threat to the status quo, which is to keep us away from our African heritage. So it will really be positive for ones and ones to support the works, so that we can also be able, through the sales, so that we can also be able to have a contribution that goes towards the Bantu Soul Society. So yes, they are shipped anywhere. They can be shipped anywhere.
All right, give thanks. So moving forward now with the reasoning still, a little bit more insight into Bantu, as that is the the reason we are here, to learn more about the Bantu society. But also, we don't want to give away everything. We just want to give the people a taste, so they can get an idea, so they can really take it seriously and sign up and get the full lesson. We just want to introduce the information a little, because like, speaking for myself, I really don't know much about Bantu, and especially since you explained that is 75% of the African population belongs to this particular group of people. And what we learn about Africa is that there's so many different cultures, there's so many different, as you said, tribe isn't really the word, but we'll go with tribe. So many different tribes of people with, it seems like so much variety as far as, What, as you said, where they got so many names for God, so many different like oral traditions, masks and dance and drums, and so we just think that everybody's praising, a different God, and it's just kind of not correlated. But the way you put it, it seems like maybe all of these different cultures have similarities. So I would like for you to kind of give us some insight, as to um, what are the commonalities that you find. You could just define, some of the Bantu culture, as you said, cosmology, spirituality. Ontology is a word I've never heard before, but if you could, give a little insight into that. And just introduce the information as much as you're comfortable with, sharing for free.
All right. No problem. Basically, what is happening, that is why you hear we talk of African culture in singular. We have a unity of culture and different tradition. One culture, different traditions. Like the culture of God is one. We all hold on to the idea of the high God. The supreme God is one throughout the continent. Then it differs in terms of traditions. Some refer to that one God as the owner of light. Some they refer to that God like Mwene Nyaga in Kenya, it means the owner of light. Rama said it means the source of all light. And then some will say Menzi, the creator. Katonda in Uganda, the creator. Velingani, the one who came first. So it's different traditions of the same thing. Now, the difference here is that you see, when it comes to Africans, people emphasize our differences and not our commonalities. Now, what we are trying to do here is we acknowledge our difference, but we emphasize our commonality. And other cultures, they actually use their differences as a strength. Like if you go to Islam, they talk about the 99 names of Allah, which they refer to as the 99 attributes of Allah. That means 99 names are the Arabs, even before they became Muslims, they knew this God with these names. But under Islam, they have them all contained together. So they use their difference as a strength, and they look at it from the unity point of view. You go to the Hebrew tradition, if you go into the Elohim school of thought, there are 12 names of El. Actually, Elohim is a compound of 12 names, El Shaddai, El Tzibo, El Nisi, El Elyon, El Tzebaot. It's like, if you are going to look at it from that perspective, you say, these people are having 12 gods with 12 different names. And then these Muslims have 100 gods with 100 names. And then the 100th one, they say is the name Allah, and the others are just attributes. So we are numerous. We have many traditions. So we have about 3,000 names of the same high God. So that is the commonality, is that we have one common culture. We all hold on to the idea of a supreme God. We all hold on to the idea of the ancestors. Among all the Bantu people, you will never find any of the Bantu people who don't have reverence to the ancestors. We all hold on to Ubuntu, which is our highest principle of living that govern personal and interpersonal relationships, how we relate with one another, how we relate with our environment, and how we relate with the Great Spirit, what the people they call Mudimu. But also we have, I've mentioned that we use 3 stones when we make fire. We are indigenously, we are cattle keeping society. Indigenously, we are an agricultural society. We plant what we eat, and we eat what we plant. So and that cut across the continent. When you talk about now the quintessential Bantu people, what is common among them is all of these things. our cosmology is the same, our ontology is the same. Now, the word ontology, it's about being, our concept of being. When we define being and define ourselves as opposed to the other, is the same all throughout the continent. So the being is the Muntu in singular, and in plural is Bantu. And then our philosophical way of life is Ubuntu, and our culture is Isintu. Now, this you can get it across the continent among the Bantu people. So yes, we and our cosmologies are the same. Our epistemology, our theory of knowledge is the same. We are largely oral traditionalist. Our knowledge is being passed on from generation to generation. We have all the fraternities of the keepers of knowledge, the chosen ones, abaketiwe or bakhetilwe. And then you have how the knowledge is preserved, how knowledge is passed on to the others. We all have initiation school systems that we're passing knowledge from the young, from the old to the young. We have a system of initiation where they turning boys into men. It cut across through all the Bantu people of Africa. So we have a cultural unity in terms of the culture of the Bantu. When you talk of Bantu culture, you talk about one culture and then different tradition. When you talk about Bantu spirituality, you talk about one spirituality, we refer to it as African spirituality, with many traditions that the scholars of religion and mainly Christians and Westerners, they will refer to it as African traditional religion, or ATR, or African primal religion, or African primitive religion, or African tribal religion. So we have these different traditions, which are all component of the same spiritual expression, which we refer to as African spirituality. So our philosophy is Ubuntu. I've already articulated. When we talk of African philosophy, we talk about the philosophy of Ubuntu, the humanization of the human. I am because you are, therefore we are. What define us? What define our personal and interpersonal relationship? Our calendar system, we are largely agricultural societies. We observe seasons that determine harvest, that determine rainy season, the beginning and the ending of winter. What is it that we do in winter? What is it that we do in summer? So our calendar system is largely the same among the Bantu people. Again, different traditions because of different languages, but also the language is the same. It just have differences there and there. Here we'll say Bantu, Bantu, Banu, Vanu, Watu. If you go to Central Africa, it's Watu. One of the name of the founders of the Naya being the Congo Watu. If you talk of Congo Watu, it's quite interesting that Congo is referred to the Congo, the land of the Bantu. Watu, Batu, Bantu. So Watu, Batu, Batu, Vanu, Anu means the same thing. So we are a cultural community, we're a linguistic community, and we're a spiritual community, which all of these are one. So we have a unity of spirituality, we have a unity of culture, we have a unity of language.
Good. That's awesome. Very insightful. You know, I'm learning as we speak, and I really appreciate Love the Eye taking the time to be here with us to explain these things. Because most of us have been educated by our captors, our oppressors, and taught to understand this all as tribalism and, as you said, primitive and backwards, but it really and truly is, it seems like identifying under this Bantu banner, if you will, could be more of a unifying force than a division or anything negative, you know? So my next question then is, okay, being that 75% of African population would belong to the Bantu people, and as you said, those of us in outside of Africa that have been taken away, our ancestors were brought over here as captives, who are also Bantu. How now does Rastafari, His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie, specifically, fit into, all right, like say you have your different names, you said you established that there is a one concept of a most high, a high God, supreme God. How does His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I fit into that in a spiritual or religious, cultural? Where does he stand in all of this as a Rastafari?
Well, as a Rastafari and a Bantu Rasta, if I should make that emphasis, is that we de-biblicize His Majesty in a sense that we stop this idea of trying to look at him as the God of Israel and get to look at him as the God of Africa. That is beyond Israel. But also, all these ideas of the God King are found among the Bantu people, which I think it made it easier for most majority of African people to identify with Rastafari. When the missionaries first came into our land here, in the land of the Bantu, in the land of the tribes, when they met the kings and they tell them about King Jesus, the kings, most of our kings, they said to this, like you watch the old Shaka Zulu movie, the conversation between him and the Europeans, and he told them that he is the King of Kings here in KwaZulu. You go to the Bapedi King Sekwati, who said, the king is the God of the earth. So the idea of God being a king or the God King is an African idea that is embodied within all this Bantu tradition, that our kings are divine. The law of the king is the supreme law. You disagree with the king, you leave his village. So the king is a divine representative of God on earth. So when you look at this, His Majesty is but one of the 3,000 names that the Africans refer to God as much as those who are using the English articulation and the English Bible, they say His Majesty is Jehovah. They say His Majesty, some of them, they say His Majesty is the second coming of Jesus Christ. So if it is okay to call His Majesty God, which is a German name, and to call His Majesty Jesus, to call His Majesty Jehovah, to call His Majesty Elohim, what is wrong with calling His Majesty Ramasedi? What is wrong with calling His Majesty Katonda? Which is basically most African countries. I've been to about 18 African countries. In some other countries, the Rastafari, they don't speak English at all. Like majority of the congregation in Tanzania, they speak Swahili. So they refer to His Majesty in their indigenous language, that His Majesty is Mungu, Mfalme, Simba ya Yuda. You understand? So they are defining him within their own indigenousness. They don't get out of their indigenousness. They look at him, as Marcus Garvey said, we will look at God through the Ethiopian spectacles. So it's about just looking at His Majesty through the Bantu spectacles, not limited to Ethiopia, because as I've mentioned, that the history of Ethiopia for the past 3,000 years is Judeo-Christian. But if we're getting out of the Judeo-Christian space and we're getting into the broader space of Africa, we talk about looking at His Majesty through the Bantu spectacles, that one can comfortably relate with His Majesty in the terms that are familiar with him. That when I say Mudimu in my culture, what do I mean? When I say Ramasedi in my culture, what do I mean? And by saying that in relation to His Majesty, does it make sense? And we're trying to separate sense from nonsense and make it make sense that you don't have to get out of, because God belongs to no religion. So you don't have to get out of your African spiritual culture and adopt the Judeo-Christian religion in order to have a relationship with His Majesty. But you can have his relationship with His Majesty through your own spiritual culture, because the relationship between man and God is spiritual, it's not religious. So our relationship with His Majesty is spiritual. So our African spirituality facilitates that. And His Majesty has said it even in his famous speech that Bob Marley turned it into a song, that we Africans, we are confident in the victory of good over evil. So His Majesty doesn't say our Africanness is a stumbling block to attaining good over evil, to attaining the victory of good over evil. His Majesty said, when Africa's righteous people come together, the world will come together. His Majesty doesn't, and what continue making him supreme and different from others who might even claim to profess the same Christian faith. Like, people are telling us His Majesty was a Christian, so they have to be Christian. But the Ethiopian Christians are not like His Majesty in their own worldview, in their own relationship with Africa, and so forth. And also the most Rastafari who profess the Christian faith are not like His Majesty in relation and respect to African culture. You will never come across any speech of His Majesty bashing the African culture. You'll never come across any of the teachings of His Majesty referring to the African culture as pagan, as heathen, as backward, as all of that. But I have come across many Rastafari here at home who use the name of His Majesty to fight against their own African culture and their own African identity. Some they even say it in their own language, like Mina Andiena Umxhosa, like me, I'm not a Xhosa, me, I'm not a Zulu, and he's saying it in Zulu language, and he's carrying a Zulu surname, and his surname is not his name, is the name of his ancestors. He inherited it. So again, it is kind of like render Black people schizophrenic. So to cure them from that schizophrenia, we brought in the Bantu soul society dimension, that we should ground ourselves and understand that to have a relationship with the Great Spirit, which in this context we say is Rastafari, within the Rastafari context, and within the Bantu, the different Bantu tradition will be Kamata, will be Mvelingangi, will be Mudimu, will be Ramasedi, and which most Rastafaris have mentioned that they refer him like as such, even those who are using the Bible that is translated in African languages, because the Bible, when it's translated in African languages, is using the indigenous African names of the Great Spirit to refer to the biblical God. So they will still refer to His Majesty, even coming from that biblical perspective, using their indigenous African name, which show that there is no conflict. Why do you say then African culture is evil, but you take a name that come out of the African culture to refer to the divine with it in your Bible and in your Rastafari culture and tradition? So therefore, we try to sort out this contradiction and show that there is no contradiction here. There is no difference. One does not have to stop being a Bantu or an African in order to identify with the philosophical levity of Rastafari, because in any case, Rastafari is not a dogma, it's a way of life. The problem it comes when we create a dogma out of it and we come up with orthodoxy and rigid doctrines that then try to separate Rastafari from Africa. But His Majesty said, we Ethiopians belongs to one group of people, the African people. Does not even say he belonged to Israel. He said in the opening of the OAU in 1963, that we Ethiopians belongs to one group of people, the African people. It do not even identify with all groups of people in the world. It identify with one particular race and with Africans. So if we can't find His Majesty within his broader race, which is the African, because Ethiopia is in Africa, Africa is not in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a country in Africa. So Ethiopia is a greater part of Africa. It's not the other way around, that Africa is part of Ethiopia, so Africa must fit itself in Ethiopia. No, His Majesty set up the example already that Ethiopia belongs to Africa. So Ethiopia must be defined within the context of Africa. So His Majesty must be defined within the context of African spirituality. So Therefore, it is proper that people can use their Bantu spectacles to understand, perceive, and conceptualize His Majesty. So the Bible is not the only reality that our people have. There are certain realities that are older than the Bible, beyond the Bible, outside of the Bible, that they can still use and arrive at the same conclusion. I don't read the Bible. I don't use it to rationalize Rastafari, yet I'm a Rasta. I'm keeping up the levity of Rastafari. I do what is required within the Rastafari movement to make one a Rasta, to identify one as a Rasta, except that I don't condition my view of His Majesty. I acknowledge His Majesty's supreme divinity without referring to a Bible, because again, relationship between man and God is spiritual. It's not biblical. It's not religious. God belongs to no religion. It is said in the Bible when Solomon wanted to build a temple and said, or David wants to build a temple and he said, I don't dwell in the temple that is built by the hand of man. Now, this is the same question. I say, God does not live in a book that is written by a man. God is beyond the book, is bigger than the book, is greater than the book. Try to define Him according to a particular book, you're limiting God. We have always known God before there was the book, and we have always known that the God is a divine king of creation. And this is what the Bantu people hold throughout the continent, all the way to Kemet. The Pharaoh was the God on earth, the divine king, who is carrying all these titles that today we're even referring His Majesty to. Osiris was the King of Kings, was the light of the world. All these divine titles that we're referring to His Majesty with, they have always been, even some of them, in exception of certain ones that are Judeo-Christian. But we have had all those titles that God is the King of Kings. God is the King of the earth. So now if we say His Majesty is God and we look at God from our understanding as African as to what God is, it even become more relevant and relative for us as Rastafari. We don't find ourselves sitting and thinking that, but here we have adopted ourselves into something very foreign to ourselves. The foreignness of it is with some of our people who try to push Judeo-Christianity as an exclusive doctrine to comprehend Rastafari, then that becomes a bit of a problem and quite colonial. But then if you make the people look into themselves and within themselves, deep within their Bantu soul, and find this same reality, which we call Rastafari, then we have achieved the greater African liberation.
Hey, give thanks to Rastafari. That's very liberating, to hear that and to know the connection. And I would say, I agree 100% with everything you said. It is definitely a personal quandary, to be at war with your African self as a Rastafari, which is, here as an African liberation movement, to abandon your Africanness to adopt something that is, that came, especially, it could be, people would argue in Ethiopia to say like the cross existed, Christianity existed, even though it may not have been called Christianity. But, in places, the broader Africa, that wasn't the case, definitely it was more like, as you described, indigenous and totally different than biblical culture. And, to leave that now and adopt something that came to you from foreigners, and then to value that from the foreigners higher than what you value what your ancestors established, and which to me that's contrary to the purpose of Rastafari. The purpose that it should serve for us is to make us more comfortable in our African skin. As Marcus Garvey said, our black skin isn't a badge of shame. It's it's something to be proud of. So also the culture, and as you said earlier, we told us to look to God through our own spectacles, and everybody should see God through their own spectacles. So Yeah, I mean, I give thanks. You know, this is a very informational interview. I'm like a student, even though I'm conducting the interview still. But yes, my lord. I don't really have any more questions, but I would love if if you have like say a message that you would like to send out, in regards to you know, what you stand for and what you see as the reality for African people and Rastafari people. Because as His Majesty said, unity is the accepted goal, and as my shirt says, Marcus Garvey's slogan, one God, one aim, one destiny. We're all supposed to be rallying under the red, black, and green, the red, gold, and green, to make ourselves more solid and make Africa more free in the form of physical freedom, but also spiritual and mental freedom as well. Yeah, so I'll just give you the floor for a moment to speak from your heart to the people and whatever it is that you want to say to them.
Give thanks, my Lord. Basically, what we've been doing now, this exercise, which we call the interview, this conversation we had, we established the oneness of the Black culture. We've established the oneness of the Black people. Now, taking that oneness of the African culture, the oneness of the African race, and applying it in Rastafari, it is basically the most surest way for us to attain unity, because unity has been very elusive within the movement, as we know. We have a lot of unity structures. I belong to a couple of WhatsApp groups where it's nothing but fight among the people who are striving for unity, because they emphasize their diversity, and they are not acknowledged, they ignore their commonality. Now, with this perspective of Bantu Soul Society, is designed to acknowledge our diversity, as we acknowledge there is some diversities, but we emphasize our commonality. What is common about us? We are Bantu, we are the Bantu soul, and we are the Bantu society. So a Bantu soul society. And that the battle over the years, it is for the soul of the Bantu. Now, with this, we're saying to our people that let us contribute to African Renaissance. The Africa that we want and the Africa that we come from, the Africa of our ancestors, where at one time we're in harmony and in peace with and at peace with each other, where weapons were not formed to kill a man or to take life, but were formed. These spears in the beginning were there for our people to defend themselves from wild animals, but not from another people. Now, taking it into the current context is that let us use the spear of African spirituality to bring together African people from all four corners of the world, at home and and abroad, that we establish the oneness of race, because the problem with us is that the race consciousness, the race first consciousness that Marcus Garvey spoke about, with the bringing in of religion through Judeo-Christianity into Rastafari, it undermined the race first. We need to understand that from the beginning, Rastafari began as a response to colonialism and slavery. Rastafari began as a liberation movement to liberate these people who are oppressed, suppressed, downpressed in all aspects. Now, we started to reach a point where we allowed the enemy to come in and start to tell us about that we must just embrace the one love. And we're the only people that everybody's emphasizing that we need to forget our history. We need to forget our past. We need to forget our Holocaust. We need to forget what happened to us. Now, we can't forgive without first healing. And for us to heal, so the Bantu Soul Society is a therapeutic culture that we are bringing in to heal our people from traumatic church disorder or post-traumatic Christian disorder that has left us so traumatized and so divided on the basis of God, something we never fight over. In Africa, we never fought over God. They will tell you even in our Zulu, Bantu, Nguni concept of man, our Bantu ontology, that there are three things that a Bantu will die for and should die for. Is his cows, his cattle, is his women, and is his land. So those are the three things that we have always found ourselves in conflict fighting over. We never fought over God. So this idea of fighting over God, debating God, which God is higher and which God is lower, is very foreign to us as Africans. And it's foreign to us as the Bantu, because we have always acknowledged the other person idea of God. Even within the Kebra Negas, when you read the conversation that took place between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of Sheba, she's saying to Solomon, in my country, I worship the sun. Some people worship the moon and others worship the stars. So basically, she's effectively articulating religious tolerance that existed prior to her meeting with Solomon. 6 months down the line after meeting Solomon, she go back to her country and she say, from now on, everyone will stop worshiping what we worship and we worship the God of Israel. Now she introduces something very foreign to Ethiopia, which is religious intolerance. And ever since where this religion has gone, there's always been religious intolerance. Whose God is true, whose God is false. And this has tainted the Rastafari movement, that even if you find that you are all Nyabingi members, you have the propensity to argue among yourselves who's more Bingi than the other, who's more Rasta than the other, and people will be, I have seen brothers fighting another brother in the name of defending Jah, and I'm thinking that no man can defend God, No one can fight for God. Who was fighting for God before you were born? And who's going to fight for God after you are long gone and dead? So this is a trivial argument. We never had such thing in our own Africanness. So therefore, Bantu Soul Society is there to return us back to unity, to return us to our psychology, our philosophy, our cosmology, our ontology, and our own epistemology, our own knowledge system, that how we knew things from our indigenous perspective, not what is being fed into us. So we're saying to our people that they should, if they are interested, this is a free will knowledge sharing system. They're interested, they can always approach us for online classes, and we make those arrangements for the online classes, whether they are in America, whether they are in the UK, whether they are in the Caribbean, or whether they are in South America. They can approach us, and then we facilitate these online classes and capacitate them with knowledge, because knowledge is power. And more especially your knowledge of your own, it is liberating. It is said that to destroy an oppressive culture, you must live up your own culture. So for us to destroy a culture that is oppressive to us, we must embrace our own and live it up and make it our defense system and weaponize it, because everybody has weaponized their culture. Mao Zedong said to his people, and through the cultural revolution that he was leading, that they don't need to adopt other people's culture, they need to take the Chinese culture to the world. Now we want our Bantu people, we want to take the culture of the Bantu to the black world, all over the world. We're not interested, we're not about to convert the white man into a Bantu or to convert the Chinese or what. We are just concerned about our people. We are here for the liberation of our people. We're the only race of people that we are very oppressed, and we're the only race of people that we don't understand that we are at war, and we're the only one who turned the battlefield into a playfield. We don't take things serious. And that is why we are a victim of every genocide, including the latest COVID-19 things, like every machinations that is developed whether it's slavery, whether it's colonialism, whether it's neo-colonialism, whether it's apartheid, whether it's neo-apartheid, the black man is the victim. So we need to understand that those great men like Marcus Garvey who came in and taught us to embrace our race, we are complementing their works by not only talking about the race, but what make up the race, our cosmology, our spirituality, our ontology, our epistemology, our calendar system, our philosophy, our psychology, the strange working of the mind of the Africans, that our mind work in a very strange way, and we need to embrace it. That the way we rationalize things and conceptualize things, it is relative and relevant to ourselves. Otherwise, we become Afropeans. We become poor imitations of the white man. We become poor imitations of the Europeans by continuing to try to adopt the culture of the other people and leaving yours behind and calling it primitive and everything. So Africanity is a neo-African culture. It's a modern African culture. It's an African culture that we articulate it even in English as we're doing now. It's an African culture that is universal. It's an African culture that is tailored to fit Black people everywhere in the world, whether they're in the continent or they're not in the continent. So we are bringing the continent to those who have not been into the continent, that when they relate with this thing, when we share the language with them, we share the philosophy, we share the spirituality, we share the culture, we share the history, they can feel Africa even when they are far away from Africa. They can feel at home even when they are not at home, because we bring Africa to them and we bring the African culture to the Black world at home and abroad. Give thanks.
Yes, General. Give thanks, Honorable. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for the message. Yeah, unity is the only accepted goal, tolerance, unity without uniformity. But there is, just, as you said, just embrace the commonalities and, agree to, be respectful of the differences as well, Yes, General. And again, the name of the clothing brand is Somandla. If you want to, to the viewers, if you want to purchase, you want to support, you can reach out to General ThauThau directly. And also, if you want to be, if you want to learn the Bantu from the Bantu Soul Society, you could also reach out to General ThauThau. What's the best way for them to reach you, on Facebook, or is there any other platforms or email address?
We have a Facebook. We have through WhatsApp. We have a.
What's the WhatsApp number, if you don't mind?
Just +27 73 788 5808. And then we also have our website, which is Bantu Soul Society .co.za. I will verify, but we have also a website, and then we are active also on TikTok. You can also be able to reach us there. On TikTok, you can also, if you don't get hold of me, you get hold of Duchess of the Seas, which is my queen, on whom we are working together, Bantu Soul Society. So you can get us through TikTok, you can get us through WhatsApp, Facebook, our website. Give thanks.
Rastafari. So do reach out, do support, support Black business, support Black education from our own, from our own mind, our own ancestors' culture is very important, Can't emphasize it enough. So yes, my Lord, give thanks, Honorable General ThauThau, for being with us. Thank you for sharing. It was definitely a great experience. I learned a lot, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So I look forward to, working together more and learning from you. Thank you, for the ability to sit at your feet. And I invite, my brothers and sisters, from around the world to do the same. Yes.
Give thanks, Honorable Jadaniel, Prophet, for once more providing I with the platform of the African Liberation Network. And yes, it's been a while. I think we have about a year without communicating. But yeah, I give thanks to see that the eye is still strong and is still on the African Liberation Network to liberate our people. Give thanks, Lord Rastafari.
Rastafari. Yes, and to the viewers, give thanks for your time, give thanks for listening, and spread the word. Share the video, share the concept, share the information, share the links to General ThauThau. Yeah, help to spread the word. This is a positive thing, so word of mouth is the best way, the best advertisement. So, without further ado, we will adjourn for now, but I'm sure we will have you back again, Honorable, and we look forward to it, okay? So, yes. Yeah, blessed love to one and all, strength and powers, and all guidance and protection. This is the African Liberation Network, and again, I am the host, the Honorable Prophet Daniel, and we give thanks to our worthy, esteemed guest, Honorable General ThauThau Haramanuba, and we bid him all strength and powers in his endeavors. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Stay tuned. Blessed love.
Blessed love.